how's it going, everyone? This is Cameron Fry with Flash Weather coming at you with a special vlog. No, this is not a weather update. We actually have some pretty calm weather on tap the next 5 to 7 days, so just know that there's not a huge storm just around the corner. Rather, I want to talk to you about some important warning lessons I gathered listening to a recent podcast by Dennis Milletti. He's the professor. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Colorado, I should say. He wrote a book back in 1999 called Disaster by Design. And again, this is coming off the Weather Brains podcast from last week. And normally I wouldn't, care so much to record certain points, like I'm taking notes and, sermon. But this was a pretty interesting podcast with some very important points I feel like shouldn't be limited to the weather community, but really should be available to the masses. So I wanted to just do my part in extending these important points, again, these important warning lessons. So there's 5 that I want to cover. These aren't my points, so I can't take credit from what's not mine. However, I will shed some commentary in between the lines, so bear with me on that. So the first point I want to bring up, and some of this kind of ties into common sense, practicality, but still it bears mention in the context again of what to do when your area, specifically your location, is storm warned. So the first point is human beings don't immediately respond to warnings of impending disaster. Rather, they seek to confirm the information and interact with others, i.e. people aren't social islands, they're social animals. That confirmation process, rather people looking to verify what they've heard, leads to lag time and response delay. And this is a big problem for warnings as opposed to watches and alerts that are measured in days. So you're talking again about warnings that, hey, you got 30 minutes to do this, 45 minutes to do this, versus watches and alerts. You have days of heads up, watches, you shouldn't be taken by surprise. All right, so I think this is a really solid point and worth discussion. And again, I'm getting into commentary here, but there's so many apps, there's so many tools at our disposal on our iPhones and our iProducts. I've wondered in recent years if there's like an oversaturation of access to information as opposed to information itself, and the messiness of conflicting information. How are you supposed to respond if one app says something and another app says something else? What if technology isn't on the same page? It's maybe pointing us in the right direction, but and again, the accessibility is a pro, but how should we prioritize technology? What app should I download? What app should I leave off? That kind of thing. Because a lot, I know some people don't rely on apps, but we're kind of going in that direction. So that's why you hear me say app a lot. Certainly some of us may still watch the Weather Channel or go to weather.com for that information. But for the most part, we live in a smartphone era. So most people are going to get information, not just from smartphone apps, but social media. Social media is pulling from what source, So I think that's good. And I should say, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, but this podcast that I listened to, coming from Dennis Milletti, his foundation for what he does, it goes back to a 1972 flood in the Black Hills of South Dakota that he, in his 20s, was told to research, and he was told specifically to analyze and research how people responded, because I think if I remember, 238 people died in that flood. It was a flash flood that just kind of came out of nowhere, and I know we're talking about the 70s, but there was warning for that, and there was certain words and phrases that were used that were muddy. Sorry, that was not intended to be a pun, but it was hard to understand for the general public. Again, people interpreting certain words and phrases one way, and actually it turned out that some people who died, they put themselves at greater risk because of the warning and the way it was worded. So anyway, let's go on to point number 2. What you say in a warning message is what impacts people's behavior. A fear-based message will capture attention, but it will ultimately do the opposite of what it intends to do. So a warning should never use words that can mean different things to different recipients. I've heard this in the educational arena. It's called syntax ambiguity. Mean different things, different recipients of a warning message. So if you say seek shelter, that will mean one thing to one person and one thing to another. Same thing with the word evacuate. Okay, I know it sounds like there should only be one meaning, but how to evacuate, there are many ways to evacuate. So it really boils down to specifics. If you want people to relocate, mention the particular place and then describe how to do that. People shouldn't have to figure out what you're saying in a crunch time warning situation. I know you're not, sorry, if you're watching this, you're probably not the one who's responsible. So again, we're talking about the appropriate authorities, but you on the receiving end, just, you are the people. So just know that I'm not saying you have to figure this out. I'm just saying, we're coming at this from a recipient perspective. People shouldn't have to figure out what you're saying in a crunch time warning situation. If they have to go their cellular, if they have to rely on their personal computer or cellular device in the moment after a warning is issued to validate the information given to them, then the warning message is ineffective. If they have to turn to their cell phone, to their smartphone, to their app, whatever, to social media, and they have to validate that, is this legit, then again, the warning authorities aren't doing it right. Also, frame the message in a positive way to reduce milling potential. Milling, just people responding frantically at the time a warning is issued. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, when it comes to people receiving conflicting information, people desperately want to believe they are safe and that if something bad happens, it will happen to someone else, not them. I find that very true, not just in some people I've talked to, some other colleagues over the years, but for myself. There's so many times I went out for a run during a storm because I love to run in the rain, but I also knew that there was lightning nearby based on, just counting the Mississippis from hearing thunder. And I knew it was probably unsafe to go out, but I'm like, well, other people get struck by lightning. I won't. And just the rains pick up and you start to get a little bit of, oh man, I'm in the thick of it now. I probably shouldn't have done this. And, but it all starts from that mentality of I'm good. People who don't know weather as much as I do, maybe maybe they're the ones that are going to get at risk, or the people in mobile homes during a tornado. It's not the case. So if one warning says, if you don't take this particular action, there's a high probability you will die or suffer injury, and one says there's a high probability nothing major will happen, people are naturally wired to side with the latter, to side with the positive warning message, to side with the one that's saying, hey, you're good, don't worry about it, you don't have a high chance of getting hurt or dying. People are going to side with the good more than the bad. That's just how the vast majority of people are hardwired. And so good warning systems and good language in those warning systems take into account how the majority of people are naturally wired. All right, so 4, good warning emergency planning presumes conflicting information and puts in practices that divert people's attention away from oddball / less credible sources. So I'm going to be humble here. I'm probably not the most credible source. Actually, I am not. I am not the most credible source. I am a weather weenie. I'm an amateur meteorologist. When really bad weather hits, for those of you who've been following my page, I encourage you, divert your attention to those who get paid to do this. I'm a hobbyist. I'm a consultant, if you will. And just in case you're watching this and don't know my background, I did study meteorology for 3 years. I was in that field. I was on that career pathway. Did all the physics and the calculus and the dynamics, all those courses. I would draw the weather maps by hand just so that there were courses that trained you, in case computers just all fried out, would you be able to still do your job? I took all those courses when I was in college, and long story short, I was called in a different direction. Uh, and I'm not going to get too heavy in my testimony there, but just know that I do know what I'm talking about, but at the same time, like we're talking about credible sources, it's important to have a hierarchy and important to prioritize so that you're, again, not trying to check 10 different sources during crunch time and you're trying to figure out, well, what is, I wouldn't want you delaying because I'm like, well, what does Cameron say, for instance? Again, just trying to be humble. So I would divert your attention away from mine in case. But my thing is, I want to give you the heads up as much as possible. I want to try and catch you in the watch zone, not the warning zone. If that makes any sense. So hopefully what I say doesn't conflict with what the professional authorities, the people who are getting paid to do it, and what they're saying. But and a lot of times we're going to be on the same page. I'm going to agree with them. But if I'm conflicting, then yeah, go up the chain, not down to what you want to hear. Lastly, in a warning event, use every possible means of delivering information to reach more people. Social media controls the dissemination process. I think we could all agree there. I think the power of social media is way beyond what we possibly think. And even though people should prioritize their go-tos in warning situations, a lot of people, a lot of people out there are going to rely on social media on their phones all the time in many situations. So it's important on what you share, what you post. Make sure it's credible. What I like to, the word picture, the analogy that comes to mind involves a telephone game, and that was brought up in the podcast. Social media tends to telephone. If you ever played that game as a kid, the initial recipient has the most accurate truth, and then it goes down the line. By the time the last person gets it, it's something that's far removed from what it was originally intended. And social media tends to dilute information. It's still better to put accurate warning information out there. So social media has a place. It's a platform. It can be used for good. It is not an entire evil. It's just one of those things where it's there's pros and cons. Anyway, that wraps us up for tonight. Thanks, guys, for listening. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them below. If not, I'll catch you on the fry. Peace.